Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2017 PowerLink Transmission Network Forum. My name is Gerard Riley. I'm the General Manager of Communications at PowerLink, and I extend a very big warm welcome to everyone here today. We're pretty excited. This is the biggest one we've ever had. I think we had over 130 RSVPs. People at PowerLink know that transmission is where it's at, but it's good to see that other people are now catching on. This is where all the excitement is happening, and there's lots to talk about today. I think one of our biggest challenges was actually to narrow the scope of focus about what we want to focus our discussions on. So thank you very much for your attendance. I also just want to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Turrbal people, traditional owners of the land on which this event is taking place, and the elders both past, present and emerging. Also want to acknowledge Professor Paul Simshauser, the Director General of the Department of Energy and Water Supply. Thank you, Paul, for coming along. PowerLink board members Alan Millis and Sarah Zelko, and also members of the PowerLink executive. But the most important people probably is everyone else here today, because that's what we're here, is to hear from you, your perspective, your thoughts and views, and that's what today is all about. I also just want to acknowledge Tesla. For those of you who haven't seen, there's a fantastic looking car out in the driveway, a Model X. You'll have more time to sort of look at that through the morning tea break. But it's a great piece of technology. And the Queensland Government actually just announced the Queensland Electric Superhighway last week, launched that. So it's not too long before you'll be able to drive a car like that right from Brisbane and tour our entire network, 1,700 kilometres up to Cairns. What a great trip that would be, just checking out transmission infrastructure as you drive. That would be great. I just want to quickly run through what we're going to be quickly going through today as part of the agenda. I'll shortly ask Paul to come up and give our opening address before we hand over to our Chief Executive, Merryn York, to give a bit of an overview of what's been happening in the industry, and there has been a lot, and what PowerLink's response has been to that. Then we'll have Damien Vermeij, who will give a high-level overview of our transmission annual planning report. You'll see that everyone has got a copy of our overview document, which is on your tables, so we please encourage you to have a look through that as well. We don't just want your participation in person today. We want your participation through social media, so if you see the lovely Christy, just put your hand up, Christy. She's our social media guru here at PowerLink. So she's not being awkward. She's probably just coming in and taking a photo or posting something on our social media channels. And we encourage you guys to do the same. So we've got the hashtag PQ Forum for those who want to get interactive and provide your thoughts and views through the social media channels. We will also be filming the main presentations of today. We realise that not everyone can be here, so we will be filming all the main presentations in this room, and then we will also be filming the presentations in the breakout sessions as well, and we will be making those available on our website after today. We will also be taking some video footage and some photography, so if you do have any questions or queries about that, then please just see myself or Christy or one of the PowerLink team. From a housekeeping perspective, we have got the toilets are out the door and around to the left. We have two emergency exits. One is through those doors to my right and also out the front onto Chelsea Lane. Be careful not to nudge the Model X as we leave the building. So without further ado, I just might call on Professor Paul Simshauser to come up and give opening address.
Thanks, Jared. Good morning, everybody. Unfortunately, we've got the B team today. The Treasurer was lined up to come and speak today, but duty calls, unfortunately, so I'm doing the filling. Can I just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we gather and pay my respects to elders past and present. And also just thanks to Merryn and the team at PowerLink for creating a bit of a space to do the opening. It's good to be here and see so many places at this annual network planning forum and discuss the process going forward. Obviously, it's a pretty important time in the industry at the moment. I've been floating around in it for 2 or 3 decades, and the rate of change at the moment seems to be accelerating rather than slowing down. And obviously, the transmission system is going to have an increasingly important role to play over the course of the next decade or so. The Queensland government's obviously got the Powering Queensland plan. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on and how it's sort of, is designed to, what it's trying to achieve and how this all fits together. But above all, your contribution today will be critical to Powerlink's forward planning. So the only bit of advice I'd give you on today is remember it's not a spectator sport. There's great representation from across the sector, and I know that Powerlink does value having you here and making your contributions. So the energy market's been at the centre of a fairly significant policy debate across the nation for at least the last 12 months, and the debate itself comes down to the usual suspects. I won't use the wank word bingo terminology, but it's sort of reliability, cost and environmental performance. And those, and I guess it's trying to find that balance between the three of them. The Powering Queensland plan that's most recently been released is focused on all three of those variables. The national level, we've seen record high spot prices. We've also seen the first system collapse since 1964. And what's caused this is complex, and you need to go back a long way in time. And to actually find the trigger point, you're really talking having to go back at least 10 years ago. We've got this combination of, or we've had a combination of policy-induced plan, then a sort of a lack of a united policy framework regarding the environmental performance of the national electricity market. And there has been a broader policy failure to set a clear and unambiguous integrated approach to climate and energy policies. There's been fairly significant momentum and gyrations in the gas market, and that's having an impact in a way that it would never have in previous decades. And we've seen the exit of a large amount of coal plant. In fact, over the last decade or so, there's been, in fact, over the last handful of years, but if you extend that a little bit further, about 19% of our coal-fired fleet is retired. And to put that into perspective, over in the United States, about 67,000 megawatts of coal plant has retired in the last 5 or 7 years. That's about 19% of their fleet. In exchange, they've had a couple of 100,000 megawatts of gas-fired plant and about half of that again of renewables, and we just haven't had the same response. So we've had the same amount of coal exit, but we haven't had the same amount of entry along the way, and that's obviously placing strain on the system. And of course, we've had that record summer demand. In fact, I'm sure Merrin and the team will talk about that a little bit later on, but it happened on a Sunday, and if you can imagine what it would have, what demand would have been had it have been on a weekday, it would have been a lot higher. It's not at all obvious to me that we wouldn't have seen a little bit more risk to security of supply. Ultimately, environmental carbon policy sits at the Commonwealth level, but as you all know, states have a constitutional responsibility for energy. Trying to get those two linked up is proving a lot more difficult than anyone ever thought, I'm sure. But under the circumstances, the government has initiated its Powering Queensland plan. It's about $1.16 billion worth of commitments. And it's focused on short, medium and long-term challenges facing the industry. There are 4 key elements to it. Focus on delivering stable prices, and the transition to a lower carbon fleet of generators, actions to ensure the system is secure and stable, and of course there is a sort of a regional angle, as you'd appreciate, given the diversified nature of our state. The key components on electricity prices. A couple of things. There was previously that direction to networks in terms of not appealing the AER. It didn't form part of the current policy suite, but it's a trend in terms of the focus on electricity prices, and more recently the removal of the solar bonus scheme from retail tariffs. That'll actually constrain the increase this year to about 3.3%, or 1.9% over the last 3 years on average. On the wholesale prices, there was a sort of a shorter, medium and a long-term angle on that as well, which was, it started with the bidding direction to Stanwell and the return to service of Swanbank East, sort of the medium term, and then ultimately a review of the generator structures. And the result of that has been wholesale prices down 15% since that suite of policy measures are announced. At the retail level, prices have been fairly restrained in the current environment. The wholesale level, they have gone up. They've started to make their way down, and at least since March anyway, the wholesale prices in Queensland have been the lowest in the NEM, as you'd hope. The North Queensland plan, I guess there's a real, so there's a sub-element to this broader broader policy platform. It's the Powering North Queensland Plan. One of the really key elements, and that is what we affectionately call the idea of the crescent, or it's a sort of a transmission line which is trying to identify and weave its way through some of our better renewable sites. One of the things about Queensland is we are obviously blessed with an awful lot of solar resources. We also need to make sure we get our good wind resources to market as well. Asset allocation is hugely important in a renewables strategy, and unfortunately the nature of our rule book makes it very difficult for businesses to coordinate. It's not every day that you get competitors sitting down at a table sort of mapping out how to sort of conspire to bring together a single transmission line for all the very obvious reasons. So government has a legitimate role to play there. Then the trick for us will be, of course, to work out, how that's best structured, its route, its size, and of course how it's ultimately paid for. But the government has made a commitment of 150 million towards that process. We had more recently, I suppose, a recommitment of renewable target, the 50% renewable target in Queensland that followed the independent panel's review headed by Colin Muggleston. Current mix is 7%. There's a little over 17 utility scale plants under construction at the moment, or in the process of commissioning. $2.3 billion worth of investment, and it'll result in pretty much a doubling of our renewable output. And there's a pipeline of over 5,000 megawatts of projects. Obviously not all of those will get up. In fact, the history of power projects in our market is about a 35% success rate. So if you go back and look statistically at all the projects that have hit the ground and what's been the success rate, about 35%. Varies a bit by technology, but that's a reasonable estimate point. The other thing that the government has included in its Powering Queensland plan is that, to facilitate the next wave of renewables through the 400 megawatt reverse auction process. Key thing about that, I guess, from a policymaker's perspective, the advice that the department gave the government on this is that we should be really focused on trying to deal with the market failure aspects of renewable projects. Renewable projects in our country are capable of adding to security of supply, but our current policy settings encourage them just to maximise production without really thinking about what they might do for security. And that's the sort of thing that a government can step in and try and start to facilitate. So that'll be a key focus of that next round of initiatives. So I might leave it there and exit stage right and hand over to Merrin to map out the day. I guess just in concluding, it's a pretty fast-moving space. Good time for you to be here. Good time for you to provide some good feedback into PowerLink. I guess there's a whole suite of measures that that the Queensland government is progressing. We believe they're all consistent with where the market's going. We hope they are. And I guess we're in a very fortunate position in our state. We have a very in comparative terms at least a very young fleet of thermal generators that'll be around for quite some time to come to help us through the transition and make sure we keep the lights on the way through. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for coming and taking some time out of your no doubt very busy schedule to talk and introduce our annual Transmission Network Forum. We're very fortunate to have Paul come. So I'd also like to acknowledge our directors, Alan Millis and Sarah Zelko, who are here this morning. If you do get a chance to touch base with them through the morning tea break or later in the day, please do that. But more importantly, I'd also like to welcome all of you here today and thank you for being here. Today's going to be a great opportunity to talk about some of the things that are going on in the energy sector, and that's really why we've put this forum on, so that we can have those conversations. So I'd really encourage you to be part of that. Along the way, of course, we will share some of the information from our transmission annual planning report for this year, and Damien Verme is going to come and talk to you about that after I share some other things with you. And then we'll break out into groups. So we'll be going into breakout groups, and that's where I'd really encourage you to have those active conversations. Share with us what you're thinking, what's concerning you, what's going on in your part of the energy sector, so that we can get your insights. But first, I want to share a little bit about what's going on for Powerlink, how we're seeing things, and of course some of the things that we've already done in response to that changing energy landscape. So, customers. Ultimately, Powerlink and all the other parts of the supply chain, all the businesses that you're part of, we're all here to deliver energy services to customers. And we know that customers want a supply that's secure and reliable, and they also want it at an affordable price, one that they consider is value. We also know that there's a shift to a lower carbon future occurring, and Paul was talking about that earlier. There's already 438,000 residential rooftops with solar connections. That makes up 1,706 megawatts of installed solar. And these three things, that secure and reliable supply, price representing value for the customer, and that lower carbon future, is what's referred to generally as the trilemma. And that's really the kind of the equation, the simultaneous equations that we're all trying to solve for. But of course, when we consider customers, even when we put them at the centre of what we're thinking about, we know that customers are not one homogeneous group. They are many and varied, and they behave in different ways, they have different needs, and really importantly, they can respond to the changes that are occurring in different ways, so have different capacity. And that applies to business and large users as much as it does to residential customers. And we also know that the way in which business responds will impact on the economy. So there's a lot of things that work together where we have to think about customers. So one of the other things that we see is media coverage, and I put this chart up to really show the intensity of what's going on in the industry at the moment. This chart shows energy industry coverage in the media since the beginning of 2015 through until now. So you can see that great big spike there. That's the most significant peak, is when the South Australian blackout occurred. And since then, you can see there's been a lot more media coverage than there was prior to that. So it's really reflecting the interest that there is in the energy sector at the moment, with industry commentary in the media becoming a daily occurrence. The other thing that we're seeing is that the literacy of what people are talking about has changed. So things that we would have traditionally talked about amongst our engineers, like inertia and system strength and fault levels and things like that, are actually being talked about in the media and by ministers and customers. And they want to know, what does that mean and why is it important and how does it all fit together? And I actually see that increasing dialogue about those things as a good thing, because it means that the whole sector can understand what the real issues are and that they can participate in making sure that decision makers have information on which they can make the best decisions that are available. And that also applies to Powerlink, which is why we run forums like this, so that for the decisions that we make, we can get your input and understand what's of interest to you, what impacts on your businesses, and we can use that input to take the decisions that we need to make related to the transmission network. So we've talked about the significant part of the transformation that's occurring that's really being driven by customer concerns over price. The other key driver in the change that's occurring is that lower carbon future, and there's various federal and state arrangements in place. These changes represent both challenges and opportunities, as I'm sure many of you are aware. But we see that the transmission network and Powerlink will play a key role in that change, not only because the transmission grid is a platform for energy exchange, and it's an important piece of physical infrastructure that will be part of continuing to deliver a reliable supply of power, but also because Powerlink has technical expertise that can contribute and help manage the change. So we can apply the knowledge of our power system engineers to help with the laws of physics, because that's what dictates the second-by-second operation of the power system and makes it all hang together. So that's something that we are very focused on, making sure that we can contribute. This timeline shows some of the decisions and market reviews which have occurred over the past couple of years, and Paul talked about how it's been pretty intense over the last 12 months. This goes back to 2015. You can see how the industry reports and initiatives have continued to roll out. So while the conversation about the future of energy arrangements was gaining prominence, the South Australian blackout occurred in September 2016, and it really put energy firmly on the national agenda. Networks, of course, had already been thinking about some of these changes, and we'd been working with our peak body, Energy Networks Australia and CSIRO, to develop the Electricity Network Transformation Roadmap. And that was released as a final version in April this year, and it provides a viable roadmap for how the industry can transition in a lower cost for part of that lower carbon future. In October, COAG initiated the independent review into the future security of the NEM, and in June that final report from the panel, which is led by Alan Finkel, was released. And then we also had the Queensland Government announcing its Powering Queensland plan, which Paul's already talked about, with changes occurring. So some of you, I know some of you and I don't know some of you, but those that do know me will know I've been around the industry for quite a while. And what I've seen over time is that the industry has evolved and become much more interrelated. And there's many more different parties that participate in the electricity industry than there used to be, even 5 years ago. So we have the things that we can easily see, networks, our network, we have households and businesses, we have policymakers and retailers, regulators, we have our existing generation fleet, much of which is synchronous generation. We have new non-synchronous generation coming on and those changes, but these are all things that we can actually see fairly easily. But there's also other parts of the system that aren't as highly visible and aren't discussed as much, but they are equally important when you think about the energy system being an ecosystem that all has to operate together. So the things that I'm thinking about there are the contract market, which some people here in the room will be very familiar with, but many of you might not be. That sits alongside the physical market, and it's important because it dictates how much firm supply is available for people who want to contract in the market, and what terms and conditions they're offered in and how far ahead that looks. We also have many more investors that play a part in the energy ecosystem now. And those investors, of course, all have commercial positions, and they don't talk about that and what impact changes in policy might have on the decisions that they make. So it's not as obvious how those parts will impact on the future viability. But when you think about it as an ecosystem, all of those different parts, the bits that are highly visible and the bits that aren't, all need to work together. And people need to be thinking about all of those different parts when they think about the decisions that they make, the policies they put in place, the incentives that are put in place, because people will respond to those things. Businesses in the industry will respond. So it really highlights the importance of us all talking together and making sure that we have as much information, good quality information, to think about and to take into account as we make the decisions that it will inevitably get made as part of that ecosystem. So I just want to turn a little bit to two things on how Powerlink is responding. We are continuing our customer and industry engagement so that we can collaborate with people. We believe that consumers will have an even larger role going forward in the energy market, and technology will continue to evolve and develop new things that we aren't really aware of now, so those technology changes will continue. And we are continuously looking for ways that we can contribute to being part of providing a cost-effective yet secure and reliable supply here in Queensland to the 4 million consumers that are right across Queensland. So just want to talk about two things in particular. One is our revenue determination. So this time last year, when I was talking to those of you that were here at the forum last year, our revenue proposal was under consideration by the Australian Energy Regulator. They handed down the final decision on our revenue determination in April this year, and that's for the 5-year period from 17-18, so this year, through to 21-22. And I guess the key point that I'd like to share with you is that the transmission component of electricity bills will reduce by almost a third in this financial year. There's a reduction of 28.5% occurred, and the price outlook for the transmission component over the remainder of our 5-year regulatory period is within CPI. That equates to savings in 17-18 for residential consumers of somewhere between $23 and $38 per annum, and that of course depends on what tariffs and what usage people have. And I guess building on the approach that Powerlink takes, we really took a different approach with our revenue proposal in this latest cycle. We really wanted to respond to the concerns that customers and consumers had raised with us around electricity prices and play our part in responding to that, while also having and proposing a reasonable level of revenue that allows us to safely and efficiently operate our network and deliver transmission services to our customers. And the AER was supportive of that engagement approach and said in their final determination that Powerlink had demonstrated a genuine desire to put the interests of its customers first, and that customer focus had allowed for a constructive approach by the AER in their scrutiny of the Powerlink revenue proposal. The second thing I wanted to just touch on in terms of our response is how we are supporting new connections to the network, particularly around renewable generators. So this time last year, when we were running this forum, Powerlink had some inquiries, but we had no renewable generators who had committed to their projects or committed to connecting to the transmission network, none of the large-scale renewable generators. Today, just 12 months later, we now have 7 new generators totalling 720 megawatts that have committed to connecting to the Queensland transmission network. And the information on those is in your overview document that's on your table. We also have 80 other inquiries or applications for generator connections. And if you put all that together, that totals 15,000 megawatts, and all of that is from renewable generators. I know Paul talked about a pipeline of 5,000 megawatts. That's obviously ones that are further advanced, and there's a big mix of things in that pipeline. And of course, there's similar levels of renewable generation interest in other states. So at Powerlink, we're focusing on simplifying and making the connection process as efficient as possible for those who want to connect to the grid. We're also, as part of the Queensland Government's Powering Queensland plan, Paul mentioned the North Queensland Clean Energy Hub, and Powerlink has commenced the feasibility study for that infrastructure in North Queensland. And that will be the focus of one of the breakout sessions that we're running after morning tea. And that, of course, builds on the renewable energy zone concept that we talked about at last year's forum and in the 2016 TAPA. It really supports clusters of diverse renewable energy projects with the aim of reducing asset duplication through infrastructure sharing. And as Paul mentioned, it's not necessarily something that generators, the proponents of those generators, would necessarily initiate on their own. In addition to the North Queensland Clean Energy Hub, we're also working closely with Economic Development Queensland on a renewable energy zone at a site at Aldoga, which is near Gladstone. So if we think about our proactive stakeholder engagement, today's forum is part of that approach to proactive stakeholder engagement. Through this and a range of other forums that we run throughout the year, we engage with more than 100 stakeholders, and they all provide that valuable input that we need to contribute to the range of decisions that we have to make. And we want to continue to improve our engagement so that we can make the best decisions we can make to deliver on the trilemma: the secure and reliable supply at a price that's considered value by customers while also transitioning to the lower carbon future. So if you have ideas of things that we can do differently or things that we need to be engaging on, please let us know. That's what that blank part of the circle there is, that if you've got ideas of things we should be doing that we're not doing, just let us know and we'll factor that in. After our next presentation, we'll be running our interactive sessions, and I'm sure you've all signed up when you responded to the invitation for one of these 3 sessions. As with previous years, we look forward to hearing your thoughts and taking that information back to PowerLink to help us in our decision making. I'd like to thank you again for your interest and attendance here today. It's great to see so many people in the room. And now I'm going to hand over to Damien Vermeer, who's going to share with you the TAPA highlights.
Okay, thank you, Merrin, and good morning to you all. So I'll be presenting the highlights of our Transmission Annual Planning Report, the TAPA. So the TAPA provides information about the Queensland Transmission Network and an overview of PowerLink's planning processes and decision-making on future investments. So as we've all just heard, the electricity industry as a whole has been impacted by changes in economic outlook, electricity consumer behaviour, government policy, and emerging technologies. And these changes impact the way that PowerLink delivers its transmission services. Now more than ever, we have to understand and focus on what our customers' needs are and be innovative as a business to support the Queensland economy and lifestyle as our industry and technology evolves. So in the current environment of flat outlook of demand for transmission services, PowerLink continues to focus on delivering better value to customers through alternative practices such as deferral or non-network solutions while maintaining that reliable supply. So the key highlights that I'll be presenting today are regarding the electricity demand and energy forecasts, performance of the network, an outlook for generation, some possible future network developments, and recent developments with national electricity rules. Okay, the forecasting methodology. So transmission planning is a complex task that requires detailed analysis, and PowerLink takes a comprehensive and consultative approach to developing our forecasts. PowerLink's forecasting methodology for energy and demand uses a building block approach and is comprised of 3 steps: our direct connect customers, forecast for every 12 months, regression of history and forecast economic factors from the DNSPs, and adjustments for new technology, such as the potential impact of PV, electric vehicles and battery storage. And this model is available on our website. So you can see with our energy forecast, energy consumption is forecast to increase by an average 0.4% per annum over the next 10 years. This is a reduction compared to last year's TAPA, but also I suppose it's the energy that was delivered from the transmission network for 2016-17 was within 1% of the 2016 TAPA forecast. So our planners are getting right onto it. So what this graph shows is the transmission delivered energy forecast in gigawatt hours for the next 10 years. So it depicts a building block approach to energy and the impact of new technologies. So the grey showing the DNSP and direct connect customers, and the orange is the electric vehicles, and this makes up the transmission delivered energy forecast, the dotted line. So the blue indicates the embedded generation, and this remains steady. And the yellow is the distribution connected solar, which is increasing, and the dark yellow represents the rooftop PV, which is also increasing. And with the green on top indicating our customer momentum factor, which shows that bit of a dampening effect with electricity usage. So overall, we can see that new technologies are having an energy reduction on our forecast. So you can see the summer maximum demand is forecast to increase by an average of 0.6% per annum over the next 10 years, which is an increase compared to last year's TAPA. After the temperature correction, the 2016-17 summer demand exceeded the 2016 forecast by around 2%. So the winter maximum demand is forecast to increase also by about 0.6%. Okay, so this graph shows the historical and forecast transmission delivered summer maximum demand. So the red solid line is the 2017 forecast, medium outlook, while the green line is the 2016 forecast. So you can see that the starting point for the 2017 TAPA is higher than the 2016 one. This is due to the slightly higher than expected maximum demand, which we actually received in 2016-17. So the increase in demand was the result of a higher weather-dependent component with more air conditioning load. For the 2016 TAPA, electricity prices were predicted to decline and then stay flat until the end of the 10-year period, where they start to increase again. For the 2017 TAPA, the increase in demand from 2020 is largely due to an expectation that electricity prices will fall and that the Queensland state economy will return to that solid growth. So that's where we can see that the start of the kick up on the red solid line. Last summer we had two very hot days, the 18th of January and the 12th of February. The 12th of February was particularly hot, but landed on a Sunday, as Paul had mentioned. So if the hot weather conditions were replicated on a weekday, then it is predicted that a 10% probability of exceedance demand would have occurred, with a maximum demand being in excess of 500 megawatts higher. The 12th of February was temperature corrected to a 50% POE by reducing the actual demand by 90 megawatts. And you can see that with a corrected curve below the historical point, so just below there. Similar to the energy forecast, the summer maximum demand is impacted by new technologies, with battery storage having the potential to flatten electricity usage. This would reduce the need to develop transmission services to cover short time duration peaks. So we to continue to commit to understand future impacts of emerging technologies, so our transmission network services are developed in a way most valued by our consumers. So the performance of the network. So how did the transmission network perform over 2016-17? The transmission network performed reliably over the period, despite record levels of delivered demands in Ross, Moreton and the Surat-Bulli zones. The Queensland grid sections were largely unconstrained, which allows the market to deliver that optimum generator dispatches based on the generator's bids. We've got the cyclone Debbie up there, and we can see that Powerlink's network withstood cyclone Debbie quite well, with the exception of 19 damaged towers on the Broadsound-Nebo transmission corridor. Now these were part of a parallel transmission line, so we were able to restore the feeder by bypassing the affected areas, and now we've got the towers scheduled for rectification later on this year. So overall, a very strong performance. As Merrin has said, this time last year, Chapter 7 included a map that highlighted the key areas that renewable energy connections were under consideration. And you can see on the map, so we've got the red are the distribution connections, and with the blue being the transmissions. So this year, the map shows a number of renewable energy connections projects on the transmission and the distribution network. So many are now at that very advanced stages. And so this year, Chapter 7 is reflective of this significant shift in this area. Last financial year, we signed up connection and access agreements for 7 projects, totalling that 720 megawatts. And our friends in Energy Queensland are also seeing this activity and signed up over 117 megawatts of semi-scheduled, large-scale renewable projects. So in conjunction with the 2017 TAPA, Powerlink has published a generation capacity guide to provide a more detailed and up-to-date information for stakeholders in this dynamic environment. So as part of that generation outlook, due to these new generators locating at the northern end of the network, we have flagged possible congestion in the Gladstone and the CQSQ, the Central Queensland to Southern Queensland grid sections, with additional connections to North Queensland. However, we acknowledge that bids and bidding strategies will adjust with new entrants, and actual congestion will depend on how this pans out. And we are having some studies being performed on that right now at the moment. If congestion were to eventuate, an economic solution to address the market constraints will be sought through a RIT-T. So Powerlink will continue to monitor and initiate consultation if we find there's an economic means to address any congestion which may arise. I think with the Queensland Government announcing the return of Swanbank E by the first quarter of 2018, this will also should assist in reducing the congestion over these grid sections. So as part of our integrated approach to planning, Powerlink is able to strike a balance between reliability and cost of transmission services. Our planning standard is applied to augmentation and replacement triggers, and we challenge like-for-like replacements, including the potential for non-network solutions. We also perform joint planning with DNSPs and TNSPs to identify the most cost-effective solution, regardless of their asset boundaries. The aim is that the network is best configured to meet current and future capacity needs. So we've got to focus on reducing the transmission charge over the long term. Overall, Powerlink will continue to operate the network to ensure that reliability is maintained. So across the state, we've got various projects underway, including transmission line refits. We're also ensuring reliability of supply in the Gold Coast zone with substation works at Mudgeeraba. And we've got more detailed information is available in the TAPA on possible reinvestments in Queensland, over $6 million, as well as information on projects which have now reached a committed status and are currently in progress. So plenty of work still going on. So what's going to happen in the future? So in order to increase transparency and stakeholder engagement, and in line with recent national electricity rule changes, there will be more detailed information in future TAPAs. The provision of more detailed information in the TAPA will further enhance our stakeholder engagement practices by providing an opportunity for more meaningful interactions and assist with efficient decision-making processes. The increased level of detail is in relation to our approach to asset management, planned retirements, and asset deratings and replacement expenditure. There are also significant changes in the electricity operating environment, such as their technological changes, and flattening of electricity demand growth provide an opportunity for all NSPs generally to seek out economically viable alternatives to asset replacement, which previously may have not existed. As a result, the RIT-T has been extended to include replacement expenditure. So viable alternatives may also be useful as a deferral strategy during this time of uncertainty in the energy industry, so as to ensure that transmission reinvestments are in the long-term interests of consumers. So overall, Powerlink needs to take a collaborative approach to ensuring our customers' needs are met, while also maintaining a reliable supply and secure power system, and also having a sustainable transmission business that we can all be a part of. So thank you, and I'll now invite Merrin and Jared up so we can take any questions from the floor.
So we've probably got about 5 minutes now to take any questions that you have. I think we have a couple of roving mics. Please put your hand up because there's some lights shining in our eyes. It's not too easy to see. We've got one, Mahesh is on one and Nicole's on the other. So if any questions about anything that Merrin or Damien covered in their presentations this morning, happy to have a couple of questions from the floor. No questions. Oh. The first one's always the hardest.
Thank you guys for the presentation. Travis Vining, Shell Energy Australia. I guess in terms of congestion, we've talked about potentially seeing 15 gigs of new solar capacity added in Queensland. What do you guys think the capacity limitations are around Gladstone and the northern areas before we start to see congestion constraints, or how much renewables could we absorb before we start to see congestion constraints? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. At the moment, we are doing some studies right on this at the moment because it is very topical with all the generation going up north. We can see that we can accommodate the current the signed up connections and also probably a further 1,000 megawatts. And then from then we have to look at further studies. So we do have a consultant working for us at the moment looking at these. So certainly from a perspective, we can at least get 1,000 megawatts. But then looking at the next ones, we'll see what happens with the market from there.
Gritz Jovanovic, Ergon Energy. Question about your forecasting methodology. The third pillar is new technologies. How electric vehicles, battery storage were considered in your forecasting methodology?
Well, I suppose they were considered. I suppose, yeah, we had our forum previously at the start of the year. So when we took in a lot of that impact, look at a lot of the comments from people. So we see that, yeah, we have put electric vehicles. We see that they're coming on later in the time. Certainly the solar and the photovoltaics are making an impact, and we can see that, you know, they are having that reduced energy use throughout the network. So does that answer, or we've certainly included it, and we're going through with it. So yes, and look, I suppose it's early days, but I suppose as we progress along with it, that's getting that feedback about how we're progressing and going forward. Absolutely. So yeah, it's certainly getting more complex to it. And looking at, as we said, it's not an exact science; it's a forecast, and you know, I think we're right on the money at the moment. But you know, we've got to just take everything into effect to take it forward. Yeah, well, that's right. So there is the model on the web, so you can actually looking at model it yourself, and so we have that full transparency. Saying, as we said, we're trying to understand it, but if you have ideas as well, we're more than happy to take them on board. Thank you.
Kate Summers, Pacific Hydro. Two questions, possibly for Damien. Could you clarify, for the sake of those of us coming from the south, what customer momentum is when you're talking about those figures? I'm sure it might refer to something like grey nomads coming up for the summer or something, but you know.
Not quite, Kate, but yes. No, look, it's a factor that's been in there a while. I suppose it's looking what it is. It's looking at to say, well, at the moment, you know, so people have been changing their, buying more efficient fridges and washing machines and all that. And with the current pricing, so people are trying to be more frugal with their electricity use. So I suppose what we've modelled in to say, well, how's that going to play out in the future? So we do see that there's more of a dampening effect. So that people are still going to be, when prices start to drop, people won't be going back, do a full rebound and go back to the days of old of using, you know, their power left, right and centre. But there is it's a bit of a factor that we put in to say, well, how does the consumer use electricity?
So that's like an efficiency factor.
Well, it's utilising that efficiency factor as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the second question was on your forecast and the remarkable sort of turnaround and to an increase in forecast growth as opposed to a flattening. I'd just like a little bit more as to... I've seen this happen a few times in the electricity industry. I'm sure we've all been there. We forecast it going up and then it goes flat again, and then it sort of sometimes pops up again, and then we return to a linear increment. Would you just like to undermine what that is?
Yeah, sure. As we're saying, we're seeing that it is quite flat at the moment. So, you know, with prices, I suppose, where we're seeing that they're maintaining at the moment, so we won't see much of an increase. We're seeing an increase in about 2020, so that's when, and reasonings for that, so I suppose, yeah, we're seeing that the economy is getting stronger, So we predict that it'll be getting stronger then, and also that's when electricity prices will be decreasing. So it's not a huge increase, but it is a bit of a kicker.
Yes, Simon Bartlett, Australian Chair in Electricity Transmission. One national inquiry that's happening right now that wasn't mentioned is the federal government's inquiry into grid modernisation. And I think they're holding a hearing next week here in Brisbane. And I'm wondering what Powerlink's views are. Like they're particularly encouraging us to look outwards, to look at Europe, to look at China, and look at the grid technologies that are being used as they move towards higher levels of renewables. And I'm thinking of things like, new designs for hydro pump storage, which we're particularly going to need in North Queensland with all this renewable coming online, and maybe HVDC VSC to repower some of those Gladstone to Brisbane feeders, and those sort of things are being done elsewhere in the world.
Well, certainly. So I suppose there's, with pump storage, it's such a, it's a great battery. I suppose we're trying to looking at, we've got some sites at the moment, and I suppose we are reviewing them, but also, how it combines with Snowy 2, so where they're going with that. Then it points to, I suppose, the whole interconnection. So there's all these interconnected. With regards to, I suppose, so we're looking at those with the other TNSPs and with AEMO as well, and and what we're doing with South Australia as well. As far as the new technologies, I'm not really sure of where we're, I suppose we're keeping an open eye, but we haven't really gone, fully into those at the moment.
Hi, David Guyver from ERM Power. Just a question for the team around planning. You mentioned the significant amount of renewables or non-synchronous generation possibly coming into the grid. How do you think about the existing synchronous generation in relation to those planning connection decisions and the risk of them being constrained off?
I suppose that's part of the work we are looking at the moment, with the looking at that market kind of a modelling to ensure that I suppose they're not being constrained off or we're unsure. I suppose we just have to follow the market, but I suppose we're trying to be proactive to understand with that. As I said, we are doing some modelling at the moment. I got the bit of the draft report on Friday, and I was working through it yesterday, but we still need a fair bit of modelling around that. But it is certainly an impact, and that's what we've got to understand and trying to be proactive to forward out to customers so that they can be aware of some of these issues.
Sorry, just to add to that, I guess we need to also remember, what the obligations are in relation to the shared electricity grid. So the obligations that are on Powerlink as a TNSP and every other TNSP is that it's about supplying load. So there are no obligations, just so nobody's under any illusions, there's no obligation that requires us to ensure that all generators can run at any time unconstrained. In terms of economics, that would be beyond what would be seen as an economic outcome. So if there is more generation that then is actually required to supply the load, those generators may be constrained off, and that may be a legitimate economic outcome. There's also nothing in the national electricity rules that requires us to ensure that existing generators can run unconstrained when new generators come along. So those are things that are certainly very topical at the moment as new generators do come along. But essentially on the supply side, if there is more competitive generation that runs at a cheaper or bids into the market at a lower price than an incumbent, then the better outcome for customers and the way in which the economic arrangements work in the national electricity market is that lower cost or generator that's bidding at a lower bid gets to run, and the person that's bidding at a higher bid doesn't. So that's part of the design of the NEM and the spot market, and I just want to make sure nobody's under any illusion that we will augment the shared grid, which ultimately customers are paying for, to allow generators to run unconstrained, and that's not an obligation on us to do that.
Hi, yep, thanks for the presentation. Louise Matheson from Solar Citizens. Just wondering if you could provide a bit more information as to what your forecasts are saying about rooftop PV and both household scale but commercial scale and where you think that's going.
I suppose there is more detail in the actual tablet, but we're still seeing that there is an increase in rooftop PV. I suppose, and the commercial side of it is taken into it in effect in our looking at in our forecasting as well. So I don't have the actual figures, but certainly can probably get one of the guys to have a chat with you during the break if need be. Thank you.
All right, well, without further ado, what we might do is have a quick morning tea break. Just before we do, though, just to remind you that hopefully everyone should have knowledge about which breakout session that they are going into. There should be a number on your name tag. So if you're in the first session around the Clean Energy Hub, we will be coming back into this room. So please go outside, have your morning tea. If you can try and be back here by 10:15, that would be greatly appreciated. For those of you who are in the second breakout session, you're on this room on my right, which I forget the name of. And the third session around the process to connect to the network is in this room here. And you'll be able to access those rooms off the area we'll be having morning tea. For those of you who are here together from the same organisation, I really do encourage you to spread out across the rooms. We believe it's better for yourself and also better discussion to have multiple different stakeholders at each table, all from a different perspective. That really is where the sort of the sweet spot for discussions lie. So if you are here from a similar organisation, please spread out across the room, meet some new people, network. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your attention today. Thank you very much to Merrin and Damien for their presentations again. So please go out, rehydrate, refuel, because we're going to put you to work after the morning tea break. So session 1 back in here, session 2 over to the right-hand side, and session 3 on the left. Thank you.